So welcome everyone to this new edition of the Tech Meetups. So today we have two great talks, at least one, from David and Ben, and they're going to talk us about server-guided insertion. I know it's a very trendy topic stuff, and it's very, very cool. And I love that also we have one of the guys that made everything possible, Rob over there. Thanks for his implementation, HLSJS. We had a lot of fun with SGAI this summer camp. And then I will talk about the CMCD version 2 and why you should care about it. So I hope you enjoy today's presentations, and please welcome David and Ben.
All right. So at the end of our wonderful summer camp journey, or as we neared it, Ben brought up a really good point, like, hey, these little samples and all this stuff that we have are great, but they're not always very realistic. Like, cool, yeah, you can see a slate that says this would be an ad, and that's that. And we talked about, like, well, what about actually doing something nice? Something that actually looks like it would if it was for real. And why not make this live? And that's where we kind of started off with a bunch of this work to do a little bit more work on that and make something more realistic and what we would need to have that. So before we dive into what we kind of did and what you need to know, a little primer. So server guide ad insertion for live. If you guys have seen some of the other server guide ad presentations I've done recently, you'll look familiar for the first slide, but just to set the stage, right? Evolution of ad insertion. Back in the day, we started with the wonderful world of client-side ad insertion, right? The media presentation was done with separate streams. The experience, that was actually managing this was the application, and it was generally done with multiple players. So you had a dual player system. You show one player, show the other player. Very early ones, you'd have buffering between each one. It was a bit of a challenge and all that type of stuff. But the benefit was it was distributed. It could scale relatively indefinitely as long as your ad decisioning could go with it and your delivery, because there was no centralized system that actually controlled all that. As things evolved, we got into server-side ad insertion, where the media presentation was a stitch stream, right? So now we have a single stream that can go through, plays back seamlessly, but there's a service that's actually coordinating this and doing that work. But because it is a single stitch stream, it only needed a single player for seamless play out. And that was all nice and dandy. Also had benefits for things like ad blocking and so forth early on, although there's always ways that you can argue either side of that. But the downside of server-side ad insertion was centralized. There's other downsides, things like VOD. It could be slower startup time for having to pre-resolve all these ads until you come up with something really kind of more tricky and stuff around there, or you lose out on some personalization and so forth. Now, the wonderful world of server-guided ad insertion. Server-guided ad insertion goes back to having separate streams. The experience coordinator is actually going to be the player. And this is a key thing, that when we say, hey, generally speaking, if we're talking about supporting server-guided ad insertion, it's the player that's actually going to be having the support for that. The requirements is a single player, at least from a core level, right? You can have multiple media services underneath there or sequencing that it manages to handle that, but doesn't have to. And the benefit of this is it's going back to distributed systems. So now we've been able to go beyond the original centralized system of server side, go back to a full distributed, as well as opening up a lot of really cool new doors for things like nonlinear ads and so forth. That is the driver, and the reason people are interested in server-guided ad insertion is both, in many cases, distributed, low potential for lower costs, as well as a better potential for how we present that and the experiences that we get with them. So let's now dive into the live considerations, right? We're not going to talk about SGAI in general. We want to talk a little bit like, hey, what did we need to think about when we were trying to do validation and work around this for live? So our goal was to migrate from a server-side ad solution to a server-guide ad solution. We kind of just focused in on Dash. I'm going to be bringing up a bunch of stuff that's relevant if you're doing this with, we just focused in HLS, but I'll bring up a bunch of stuff that also illustrates what you need to know if you're doing this within Dash and so forth. So the requirements, well, step one is we needed a live stream. Well, we didn't want to have to actually have a regular live workflow, although the friendly guys at Wowza also set us up to try that out, and we got to see that working there too. But we wanted to be able to do this kind of on demand via a live generation. So we're going to have to talk about what we needed for that. We needed to make sure we had ad tags already. So we had date range tags for our ad insertion, be able to manage those. And then we'd have to, in Dash, use a replace presentation and point to an MP list. If we were doing that, we went with HLS, so we were just going to work with date range tags. And then, of course, we need a compliant SGAI player. So for the work we did on the live side, we were just testing this out against the HLS.js stuff that Rob here on the call is also part of. And we were able to kind of do further validation and also, I think, find a couple things that we needed to get adjusted inside of there. So first off, a friendly reminder, when you're working with ad tags and HLS especially, discontinuity tags need to be incremented, right, including across rolling DVR windows. When we look at the actual sample of this, which we'll do in a few slides, we can point that out and so forth. SGAI is going to use relative time for the start date attribute in the program date time. Be careful with the rolling DVR. You have to make sure that you're managing that appropriately. If not, you start finding out they don't go where you want them to. It doesn't matter where they exist in the playlist. What matters is the actual start date value. A live playlist reload can update existing date range tag with new attributes by including an EXTX date range tag with the same ID. I'm going to touch on this a little bit later, but this is actually something that can be pretty powerful, that you can actually update something that's been already inserted, essentially overriding that tag by utilizing the same ID. And within Dash, you can just update the tag itself. So when we talk about some of the signaling attributes, let's look at how this looks for HLS. So here is what we can kind of consider the standard SSAI ad tag in HLS. It's a date range tag, it has an ID, of course. We have a start date, we have a planned duration, and then we have a SGAI payload. The SGAI payload would then be decoded, and that's helped provide some of the parameters and other information needed to do your ad calls. For SGAI, what does it look like? Well, it's a date range tag. Okay, it also has an ID. Cool. Now, though, at least to do the standard implementations, especially on an Apple device, you're going to specify a class of com.apple.hls.interstitial. So this is telling it to, hey, we want to use the interstitial and underlying system within the AV foundation. We're going to have a start date, and then we can have an end date. We don't necessarily have to have this other stuff I crossed out. An extra zoom offset. Normally in VOD you might do that, but in live you would not want that set to 0, and we're going to talk about why. And we'll have additional parameters. There's things like snap out and restrict and so forth that we can do, and we'll learn about those. And the key aspect of this is that we're pointing to an X asset list. So that's going to give us a JSON response that tells us, hey, what we want to play in what order, and also the ability to pass on additional metadata with that. And that's where we can do our tracking and so forth, and essentially where we would translate our VAST into that. That's what a big part of the Qualabs Summer Camp project was doing when they created the VAST SGAI project this year. Now, one thing that's oftentimes not thought of or overlooked is that you can combine these two. You could have a single date range tag that supports both SGAI and SSAI. And this is something that's becomes pretty powerful, whereas the past sometimes as we've traversed different type of technologies of how we're doing things, there wasn't always backwards. Well, we have to create one manifest for this type of ad experience and one manifest for this type of ad experience. Here we can do it in a single one, and then it just depends on which player's loading it. If it's an SGAI compliant player and it recognizes the com.apple.hls.interstitial class, it will then pick it up and automatically sequence this appropriately. If it doesn't support that player, doesn't support that, it's on a Roku or an older smart TV, you can still then bootstrap it as you normally would through your SSAI service, and then get this content to replaced out and actually do a standard SSAI off your same stream. That would require, some client-side detection of like, hey, which device am I on, and do I have support or not? But that is one of the powerful things that we can do with this. So I mentioned, I'm gonna come back for a second, like here I crossed out like the extra zoom offset. Well, why did I do that? Well, I put in these key parameters that you can also adjust, as well as linked into this with where's the specification around this. But the extra zoom offset essentially tells us, hey, where do I go back to, or what do I do when I'm done with my ad break and my interstitial? In regards to the original content. Do I want to go back to the same point in time that I left? So that would be ad insertion, meaning that we pop that in, we've now extended our timeline longer, but we will resume back to where we were, or is it going to be what I would refer to as an ad replacement? So we're actually going to replace the content time, and if it was a 30-second ad from the beginning of where we entered the ad, we're going to resume 30 seconds after. And that's where the extra zoom offset will be. I put in here, I've also modified some of these descriptions at times to try to help if I thought they needed a little bit different way to describe this to make this easy to understand. But the default for the extra resume offset is actually the duration of the interstitial. So when you're working in a live situation, most of the time that's going to be what you want. So you don't even specify an extra resume offset, or it would be the duration of your ad break. If you leave it at 0, it's going to jump it back to where it began. So it's now going to extend your timeline overall. We've already seen about the X asset list. That's that lovely JSON. Snap is whether it's going to be telling it to snap to the segment boundaries, which is very can be really powerful and really important in some situations. If you're doing like a non-linear one, then that wouldn't necessarily matter maybe as much. But you can specify both a snapping for the out and the endpoint. The playout limit, this is also allows you to specify the maximum time that you're going to allow that. So let's say, I think one example could be, let's say we're expecting a 30-second ad break, but we end up getting 45 seconds of ad back. We might not want to allow that to happen. We can reduce that. It also is going to be a cool tool to be able to use if you need to jump out and break an ad break. Think about late breaking news. There's a problem coming up. We need to get people back to the broadcast feed now. You can use that in a creative way, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. And then also the restrict capabilities. This essentially allows you to control, can I jump over my ad break if I'm seeking on a timeline or not, and to what degree. Dash has really similar things. Sometimes it has a little bit more control. So things like skipping, you can have it where it skips only one of the breaks. If you try to skip over multiple, it'll do the last one, or you can skip over them all, things like that. But generally, it's very similar in how it works. Key thing here is you're also going to specify at the very top whether you're doing an insert presentation or replace presentation. So ad insertion, ad replacement. Live, you're going to use most cases going to be replace, whereas VOD would be oftentimes an insert, but not necessarily. This is also one I think a really cool benefit of SGAI in general is in the past when we did a lot of work with like NBC Sports, so forth, there was a whole bunch of headache around live to VOD workflows when it came to ad and conditioning. Sometimes we had to like post-process manifest and remove out all the ad segments during the ad break from the live to the VOD so that it would properly work with the systems in place to be able to handle that. Now with SGAI, you can just control that with changing one tag, insert or replace, or your resume offsets. So it's pretty cool in how that type of stuff now works. I did, just fair warning on this deck, and of course we shared out, I reworded a lot of the Dash ones because the Dash spec is a little bit more challenging to interpret and read. So if you have a problem with the Dash spec, you can maybe look over here and get a slightly simplified description that might be more helpful.
You share a link to the new Dash spec?
I tried to find that, and I can't figure out where to actually share it from. I have it.
Yeah,
I don't know if I'm supposed to share it yet.
it's not public
get a
yet.
response back from Alex on that. So V6 is the latest Dash spec that has the whole cool new MPD list. They're wrapping it up right now, and hopefully it gets published out really soon. I went onto the Dash IF site and so forth. I couldn't find it anywhere. I don't know where it goes. I will follow up with Alex to find out where I should point people to for that, and I'll update the deck with it. So some special cases, breaking an ad break, early exit, right? So I mentioned this earlier. How do you do this in HLS? How do you do this in Dash? This is actually something that came up in the SVTA advertising work group recently as well. So I wanted to kind of dig in onto it. In HLS, you can add a new date range tag. So HLS is always added. And the important thing with HLS is once something goes in the manifest, you cannot change it. You never change the past. You can only add stuff in the future on the next refresh. So in HLS, if you wanted to override an ad tag, and change any of those parameters, you can, including if you adjust your playout limit. So if you set it to the current amount of time that's currently been in the ad, so if it was a 30-second ad and they're currently at 15-second playhead, you set 15, or you just set it to 0, aka anytime less than the current, equal to or less than the current, it will then exit that interstitial, aka that ad break. And the key thing is you're adding a new date range tag with the same ID. So if you have multiple date range tags with the same ID, the later one in the playlist will overwrite any of the previous ones. I think I got that right. In Dash, you can update the manifest. You don't have to add a completely new tag. You would just change some of the attributes on your current replace or insert tag. In which case, if you wanted to bust out your ad break, you can use the max duration. Same thing. You set it at or less than the current point in time of the alternate MPD playback, and then it will terminate and resume back to the wherever you have set from your resume point and so forth. So these are handy little things to know about. More importantly, that you can update these things if necessary as things proceed, which is really handy. So let's see this in action. So Hi, Ben.
Oh, hey.
One of the cool things Ben put together was this thing called Restreamer, right? So we wanted to be able to have a live stream whenever we wanted it. That sounds easy. Let's just go ahead and throw something together. We found some challenges. It wasn't as easy, but it was still pretty base as to the initial functionality, and it got more complicated when we start working with some of the ad tags. So I'm going to switch over and start looking at some of this stuff.
Yeah, do you mind if I frame this just a little bit, David?
Yeah, go for it. Do it.
The idea behind this is we've all been watching these OTT platforms, and we get to an ad break, and it like cuts out, mid word, goes to an ad break, and then comes back, and then you get the other half of the word, or it's in the middle of a scene or something like that. And it's like it is at an act break. It was an appropriate ad break. It just didn't insert correctly on that device, and some of you in attendance here are responsible for that suboptimal experience. So I hope you feel bad. But the goal was to actually see these the SGAI accuracy and see how it compares with an SSAI experience. Right? We have the ability to do SSAI on like a frame accurate basis. And a lot of people do. Those experiences are sort of like, watching the A-Team in 1989 on a television where it fades to black and then up comes the commercial and it looks good and consistent. We wanted to know if we would be able to do the same thing with SGAI, because theoretically, right, it's two decoders. The client might be a few frames off, or it might have, it might flash a little bit and change. And we wanted to see what that experience would be like. So we used real content, we used real commercials, and we put a reel together. So, sorry, David, go ahead.
A hardware problem, definitely not a software problem. Trust me.
Oh, there you are.
All right, we'll try that again. So what I was showing, if you guys, I need to share my screen again now. If you guys were paying attention, I showed when we were not using SGAI, just to show what the baseline content was. So I'll come back over here. Can you guys still hear me?
Yep.
All right, so bottom right, we burnt this on there, right? We have an ad break in 2, 1, 0. So this would be the ad break. If you get the ad break, you don't see this text, right? We just left, Elmo here to annoy you to know that your ad didn't work. But this is still a conditioned stream. Everything has segments right to the ad break spliced perfectly, because Ben is the man. Now, if we go back over here and we look at this, this is actually with our interstitial support. Right. Seven, 6, 5, 4. Frame accurate.
Super clean transition.
Sweet.
I was we had to like double check our work a bunch of times to make sure it was actually doing the thing.
And Rob was awesome helping us out as we were troubleshooting and figuring out where things were needing to be adjusted, and was it in HLSJS or something on our side with streams. But we were able to get a super seamless experience. Like I said, that's pretty much frame accurate down, and hotel internet is also awesome as always.
And you can also see that it's signaled for both SSAI and SGAI in the same stream. It's just client capabilities that determine which set of ad breaks you're going to look at, or which set of ads you're going to look at during the break. Both give you a really clean user experience. And the reason that was kind of important was a lot of the people who are thinking let's do SGAI already have an SSAI workflow. They already are replacing ads. It already works in most of their clients. And if they want to go through and update one client at a time instead of having a switchover date where bam, everybody's using SGAI, this gives you a great framework to be able to do that from.
Here you can see example one of the date range tags, and Ben's updating the start times with those appropriately. We point those to the vast SGAI Qualabs service that we put together, and able to go from there. And then it just loops this VOD asset as live. You can see that VOD asset here. We specify to this wonderful service endpoint, and then we point to which VOD asset, we wanted to rebroadcast it as live and specify the time that we want to use as well.
We can share that demo URL, right? Is that allowed, Nico? I think you're hosting it.
Yes, yes, sure. We can share it for sure.
And if anybody wants that rebroadcaster code, just you're welcome to it. It's not public because it's not good code, but if you want to use it as an example, you're welcome to have it.
Any questions? Cool. Go forth and conquer SGAI for live.
Yeah, thank you guys. This is amazing. And also, I thank you, Rob, for all the work you have done. That you made our life better to prototype all this kind of stuff. Are you there, Rob? Yet? Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you for this. I couldn't have hoped for better beta testers and implementers to prove out the work. So yeah, hey, the release, the 1.6 release was better as a result. So thanks everybody for
just in case all this interstitial stuff is already on the main branch of HLSJS, so you can try it and use it in your workflows and whatever is already in the main branch, and it's released as 1.6. So great. If there is no questions, then I will move to the next presentation. Thank you, guys. Thank you, David.
Quick question.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
So that was done behind the scenes. If the next step toward implementation with live would be to come up with some kind of big red button kind of scenario as well too, right? And how would the big red button change for live? Because that's where the information is going to come from. How would you have to modify that into an encoder in order to get the information to flow through into the manifest?
If you already have a red button workflow that you're using for SSAI or whatnot, it's very little work you have to do to add to that to be able to support SGAI, assuming your player supports too. You literally have to add a couple attributes to your existing tag if you're using date range tags in your SSAI model, which is fairly common, right? If not, if you're starting from scratch, you're right. Then you need to be able to work out your red button workflow, which has to be able to do either segment boundary or segment splicing, insertion with your timing and your date range tag and the attributes that are necessary. But if you have something already, it's much easier to migrate to it, because all you have to do is add a few attributes. You have to add an asset list or an asset source, I think it was, or asset URL, and then the class. Those are the bare minimums, although you would probably add more that defines, the things like skipping and also snapping for segments and so forth.
I would see sort of parallel workflows start right at the point of encoding, right? When you've got maybe a SCUDdy35 signal in the incoming video, you would split it off and be able to do your add break logic for SGAI and your add break logic for SSAI, and just merge the final tag at the very end when you're distributing it. I suppose there are 100 different ways you could do it based on your own workflow, though.
Cool, thanks.
Awesome. Any other question? Sarge?
I think Sarge had a question.
Yeah, is that you?
Yeah, I was just saying for Ben to add the red button workflow into the next iteration of that.
Oh, you want to see the version of it where you're inserting ads and you're actually telling the encoder to insert ads at a particular time? Yeah. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so I can just click a button and insert it.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be a next
for that, Sarge, or would it be fine at segment bounds?
Say again, I didn't hear the first part what you said.
Would you really want to see segment splicing on that? So, red button, hey, it doesn't matter if I'm halfway in the middle of a segment or not, or is it fine that it just rounds it to the next segment bound?
Ideally, you want to see it all, but like for first iteration, just do the insert. It doesn't have to necessarily be frame accurate, but I know Ben's going to want to be frame accurate. But I'd want to see two things. I'd want to see just a regular insertion, and then I'd want to see something with SCUDdy.
Good.
We can talk offline.
Yeah. And we in the SGI, the vast SGI stuff done, it would already support all the SCAI stuff. You can pass that through. It's just a matter of, obviously, if you're doing a VOD to live dynamically, splicing is kind of silly. If you have an actual live packager that's built in there, like you can say, okay, splice my segment, right? So I was just making sure, covering what might be interesting. But thanks, dude. Yeah, we can chat more.
So CMCD version 2 and why you should care. So let's try to deep dive in why you should care about CMCD version 2. So first of all, let's just do a quick recap of what CMCD is and what is version 1, so we can understand the changes and why version 2 matters. If you know, this is a great presentation from Will Law. I think it was 3 years ago about CMCD version 1. So basically what he says is the CMCD is a set of key values that are going to be communicated from a player to the CDN. The data will be sent into custom headers or query arguments. And the idea is that the players send this information to the CDN, so both player and CDN can get benefit from it. What information is sent? This is just a list of some of the version 1 keys. For example, the player will send to the CDN the encoded bitrate that the user is watching right now, the content ID for the content, session ID, for example, the top bitrate that the content has, and other type of values. When the players send the data to the CDN, what it does is it calculates all the key and values, and it sends a request to the CDN and send the CMC information through headers. This is an example over there. Or it could be like in query parameters. To have another example from this, oops, sorry, here it is. So you can imagine like, yeah, the player is going to get a segment from the CDN, and every time the segment is going to be fetched for the CDN, the player will attach the CMCD information that I just mentioned. Just to take into consideration, version 1 is already implemented in almost all players over there: Dash.js, Video.js, Checker Player, HLS.js, Exo Player, even AV Player also has support for CMCD version 1. And if you want to enable it, it's super simple. It's just configuration. For example, this is an example from Dash.js. You just need to enable CMCD into the JavaScript configuration. You put a session ID, a content ID. Those are values that matters to you. You said if you want to send the information through headers or through query parameters. And at last, you can enable and say what keys do you care and what keys you want the player to send on each CDN request. So now that we just make a refresh about what was CMCD version 2, so let's understand version 1. Sorry, let's understand version 2. So the idea behind version 2 is try to expand CMCD so it becomes a simple and very powerful tool for QoE measurements. The work around CMCD version 2 started, I think it was 1.5 years ago. It's a CTA working group. The co-chairs are Paul Copernetti and Will Law. We have already done like 120 issues, and we have 40 issues to go. So the expected release for version 2 is very like end of Q2, Q3, something like that. That's what we are trying to get. And there are some of the core contributors of the CMCD, just for you to remain their faces. Something to understand also about CMCD version 2 is the design principles we use to design the spec. First, the idea is that CMCD should be easy to implement by players. That's very important. The information should be stateless information from the player to whatever we are sending the data. We care about the privacy, so we try to prevent fingerprinting in every key we define. That's super important for us. Also, we want to have like to send the minimum amount of data for the most analytical value. Also, another mindset we have is close enough is good enough. We are not looking for extreme precision, so we are looking for, to make it easy to understand, and flexibility in what it's report. So not all keys are mandatory. Well, how we are going to make CMCD version 2 better? Well, we are going to add new keys and new modes. So these are some of the new keys that I'm listing, and there are a lot of new keys, but I'm just mention some of them, like, for example, player state. Now we are going to say the player state, if it's buffering, playing, or whatever. Also, we are going to send information about the first time download or when it received, and also other information like player head time and live latency streaming. But what I think is the most important thing about CMCD version 2 is the modes. We have 3 new modes that are called the request mode, response mode, and event mode. So what are the modes? The request mode is what CMCD version 1 is to send CMCD information to the CDN every time we made a request to the CDN. Then we have the response mode and the event mode. The response mode and event mode are modes that are not going to be coupled to the CDN. And those mode information could be sent through query parameters, headers, and also in JSON. So let's understand the modes. The request mode is the same as version 1. So every time the player requests a segment to the CDN, it attaches CMCD information to the request. Then the CDN responds like, oh, 2000 okay, and send back some video bytes. This is where response mode get in action. So the player will send a copy of the same information it sent to the CDN, plus some new insights now that we have information about what happened with the request. And that information is going to be sent to a third-party analytics server. So it's not coupled, it's not going to be sent to the CDN, it's to another server. Some of the new keys that are relevant here is that we added like URL to know which was the URL we are talking about. Now that we have the response, so we know the time to the first byte, to the last byte, the response code of the CDN, and, for example, the timestamp. So we now know more information about what happened to the request, and we can collect that. Something about then we have the event mode. The event mode, the idea is that the player will send CMCD information to a third-party endpoint each time an event is triggered. An event could be a timer, something like every 30 seconds, a user that pauses the player or mute or press mute or unmute, or an event could be some internals of the player, for example, an error. Some key insights from this mode is that it's decoupled from the request and response of the segments. Now, it doesn't matter if you have a CDN. It's just send information to a third-party server. And another thing is that not all the keys apply to event mode. As we don't have, for example, a CDN or a request, so we don't response code doesn't make sense because there is no response we are talking about. There are particular events that we have defined with a new key called event key, that these are the events we are supporting right now. It's like the player state changed, play pause, player error, some interval, also like a content ID change, or if the player enter or exit background mode, mute unmute, alt breaks, and player expand or collapse. Probably there will be more events that we are going to support. So some insights from the modes. First of all, a player can work with the 3 modes. So it's not that you have to choose a mode to work. The CMCD could be like 3 modes at the same time. Also, you can use the modes you need. So you can then use any combination of them. For example, just the event mode and just that. And don't send the information to the CDN because the CDN doesn't support CMCD. Also, you can filter the events you want to send. The players are going to be able to let you configure, I just care about an ad start and ad at the end of an ad. And I want just to send, for example, the playhead position at the content ID. And you can collect that in a third-party server. Also, players will support multiple targets. So you can put like 3, 4, 5, n amounts of servers to listen, or the player to send the information, replicas of the information, to any of these response mode collectors or event mode collectors to do whatever you want to do with that. Also, we have rethought about the JSON implementation, and these modes, the response and event mode, supports JSON array, so you can batch your request for minimizing the amount of load from your servers to collect the information you want. So now that we just cover what are the new modes of CMCD, let's understand why and what this unlocks for us. So first use case. Now with CMCD version 2, you can centralize your multi-CDN performance monitoring system, because you can use response mode, send, filter time to first byte, time to last byte, URL, and CDN keys to a server, a collector that you can create. All your plays, doesn't matter which CDN they are using, are going to report to that endpoint. And you can create a dashboard to see if how your infrastructure, how your multi-CDN deployment is working. Also, you can, for example, help your developers to understand the errors that users are experiencing. With event mode, you can trigger, every time the player triggers an error, you can send a beacon to a collector and create a list of the most common errors and give the developers, hey, you should fix these errors. Also, you can collect analytics about your content and users. For example, with event mode and sending the playback, sending the session IDs, for example, and the playhead of the content, with this you can create the top 10 trending list of content that users are watching. You can create also like the database of what was watched by every user you care, and with this you can build your OTT platform, the top 10 of your country, and continue watching. And this is very cool because it will be like same information for across all players. Then, another case. You can unify the tracking of ad reporting for server-side ad insertion and client-side, server-side, client-side, and server-guided insertion. If you put all the information in the manifest, you can use event mode to trigger, and you can trigger the ad starting, ad ending, mute, unmute, everything. You can collect by yourself all this data. You can process it, sign it, and send it to the ad provider so you get paid. So this is a great use case to unify your tracking, your ad tracking infrastructure. Also, another case, you can track sessions that are not connected, that has a connected device, but with information that it's on cache or maybe download content. So in event mode, as you don't care about the CDN, you can beacon, whatever, you can track the sessions that have local storage or just a cache in their, for example, their in the browser. So you can do that with event mode. And there are a lot of, this use case, I love this one. So for example, now you will be able to know the BMAF score across all your viewers, across all the sessions. How? You can send BMAF score into CMSD when the video encoder creates the frames or whatever. You can put that information, send it to the origin, to the CDN through CMSD. And when the player requests a segment, the CDN can put also the CMSD information, pass through to the player, and the player can now report to using also request mode can aggregate all the information about BMAF that you just put on CMSD through the new CMSD dynamic key. So this is very cool and this is very powerful because now you can understand. Doesn't matter what layer, what what was the bit rate they were watching from the content, you can track back the real experience, the BMAF experience your user had. And I think that is very powerful. And if you think, this is a common way you can send any information you care about, and you can create either for the encoder, packager, or origin, and you can collect everything in a single place and analyze all that data. And I think this pattern, like using CMSD plus CMCD for collection, is very powerful. It can unlock a lot of stuff. So knowing this, is CMCD just a QoE tool? And what if we think about CMCD version 2 as an interface between a player and a service that needs playback-related data? And this is my personal interpretation about CMCD. So when I think about this, I just see CMCD everywhere. So let's see this. This is a key insight from CMCD. So since version 1, CMCD supports custom keys. You can send whatever key, you can create in the player whatever, you can send back to the CDN or whatever key you want, also available in CMCD version 2 for any of the modes. So you can expand CMCD with information you want. Also, now that we have the response modes and the event mode, CMCD says nothing about the response from those servers. So you can use that body to send whatever data you want back to the player. And most of the player nowadays has some mechanism to know, to touch or to modify a request or a response. It will not matter if it's a CMCD request or a CMCD beacon to an analytics server. So knowing this means that you can build on top of CMCD. You can think about CMCD version 2 as an interface of some data that you can also add more data, and you can create services to respond whatever you want, and you can build plugins for players of whatever you want. So thinking about this, for example, we can upgrade our previous use case of just monitoring the CDN, and now we can not just monitoring, and we can also do content steering. We can collect data from the players about the performance of each CDN, and we can send back content steering information saying, oh, you player, this session should move to this other CDN because you're going to have better metrics or whatever. So you can do this with CMCD plus some plugins that you could write. Also, you can, for example, create a watch party experience in your application. How? You can define, for example, a leader that is a friend or someone that will send CMCD event mode, just sending session ID and the playhead, where is he in the content right now. And the followers will also send CMCD information to this watch party tracking server, and they will add a custom key called leader ID. And each time the response will just send back the leader playhead. And so the player will be able to understand where the leader is and automatically set or seek to the point in time where the leader is. So this will be super easy to implement and will work for a lot of players because the information will be the same. We will just need to create small plugins to send information and understand these custom keys. Also, another use case we can think is, for example, more context for ad servers. Think about CMCD again just as an interface. So every time, for example, client-side ad insertion, someone asks for the content for an ad, we can also attach CMCD information and saying, hey, the player is backgrounded, or this is the top and lowest level of encoded bit rates that the player experienced. So you can make better ad decision or formats about the ads to respond back to in form of BAST, asset list, list MPD, if it is server-guided insertion, or whatever. And at last, my favorite one is maybe HTTP streaming. Why? Because CMCD event mode, we can think maybe in this event mode as a universal analytics interface. maybe you can create from, I don't know, you can receive a BBB B2 signal and you can beacon to a third-party server with CMCD format, information about the content and the time and the user, and you can track everything with the same collectors, almost same code, and it will be almost like the same. Of course, there are keys that are not going to apply, but you can create, for example, a signal-to-noise ratio special key or custom key in your CMCD ecosystem, and you can, again, try to think about, maybe we can create one collector for all the services. Doesn't matter if it's a broadcast, multicast, internet, or whatever. And again, CMCD version 2 is not meant to do this. It's just my interpretation of what we could achieve if we think about CMCD as an interface. So can you try this? Yes, you can try it. First of all, in that webpage, we have a CMCD Analyzer project. This is a proof of concept using Dash.js of an early draft of that you can work and you can download over there. Just copy the link. Also, we want to tell you that we are working through the Comcast Innovation Fund. We are right now implementing CMCD version 2 into Dash.js, Shaka Player, and we are going to create plugins for HLJS and also add CMCD version 2 into the common media library for others to use it. And you will also be going to see CMCD version 2 in the IBC Accelerator. We are working close with Alex Gilari, people from Google, in the ultra-low latency live streaming at scale. The idea is that we are going to use CMCD version 2 to track all the information about the latency, because we want low latency, of course. So this is just a final recap and takes away. If you want to take a screenshots about why you should care about CMCD version 2, remember the new modes, the event modes, the multiple targets, and think about CMCD as an interface. I think those concepts can unlock a lot of use cases and make great things with CMCD version 2. So thank you everyone for listening, and if you have any questions. I would like to understand also from those use cases, do you think one of those cases makes sense for you? So please, anyone should unmute and let's chat.
So, Nicolás, just out of curiosity, so if CMCD Volume 1 uses, let's say, X amount of data, how much times that is CMCD using? Like, if I have to go to my director and say, hey, I need another 100 grand for data storage, like, do I need 200 grand now? Do I need 300 grand with CMCD V2?
Okay, that's a very good question. In fact, I think it will depend on implementation, because remember that you can filter any key or whatever you want. So you can control the amount of data you will receive, in particular in the request mode. That's the one you care, because it's going to be the CDN getting all the information. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Yeah.
Rob, like a big thing is there's the opportunity now that you can get all the data and have it be dramatically less and less expensive, because before it was all tied, with everything in the CDN logs, which can get very large, very, very fast, right? Now, if you just want the CMC data, you can extract that separately, and it's now incredibly smaller. Therefore, provides a path that can be far, far more cost effective. If you're talking about, no, I want it with the CDN logs, then yes, it depends on which parameters are activated, and technically everything's mostly optional, but there are going to be a lot more attributes now, but they still are generally much smaller than all the normal CDN log stuff, especially when you're talking about like full URLs and so forth, because we just have small bits of information. But it could be a 2x amount of attributes than we used to have.
Right. Well, I mean, the use cases would make it profitable. I was just curious from the cost side if there was any sense. Oh, it's 5x, something like that.
Right. Who knows? Because we're still trying to get through everything. Like my guess is like we're going to have about close to 2 times the number of attributes. But because now you can just get the data separate than the CDN logs, it can hopefully make this more useful, because some of the barriers for people to really adopt CMCD before is like, it's, for smaller organizations that weren't already doing stuff with all their CDN logs, it's so verbose and so much information to process to get what you want became cost prohibitive.
Cool. Thank you, guys.
Is there, looking at the architecture where you can now send the CMCD data to your own listener, does that help you kind of reduce the amount of data going to the CDN, and actually to your point, now you can fine tune it, and now it's not just the data volume, but also the data timeliness. Now you're not waiting for CDN logs, you're getting the logs directly, and you're able to make more precise, more real-time decisions. And then honestly, Rob, at that point, you can throw the data away if you don't need to record it. So maybe you are saving on storage right there as well too.
Sure.
So a good point over there is that now that we have event mode, if maybe you say, oh, I want the player to report every 30 seconds because the data you care, it's not critical or whatever. So I think you can use the modes for different type of, and again, it's like, depend on the use case, what the data you need, and then decide the mode that makes sense for you.
And perhaps this is where you integrate it into your event management system, where you have certain events that are higher priority than other events. So you should be able to then adjust to say, for the big events with, tons and tons of concurrent viewers, I want faster collection of the data. For the lower level events, I want a slower collection of the data, and again, manage the costs for what is critical.
Thank you. Any other questions or ideas or use cases you're thinking about?
So if we want to use this... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, one question, Nick, I have is, when these clients are sending CMCD data, if from the server perspective, like a content steering server or so, if I have to have a topological view of, is it like a particular set of clients in a particular geographical region, they are experiencing some problem, how can I map that? So from the other, I only see a session ID here, but other than that, how do I know that? I can get a topological view and I see a pattern, like many of the clients in a particular proximity are saying they're having buffer underruns or something like that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I think that also like key about this use case that I mentioned, like, hey, we could do content steering with this. So of course you can send, for example, I use here in particular the response mode collector because it's a copy of the same data that we are sending. It's a copy of the same data we were sending previously to the CDN, plus some insights about the time to first byte, last byte, response code, plus other information. So also you will be able, again, this is just like a concept. So you can create a server for the content steering, like I put over here. Yeah, this one. So in fact, this could be could be like a serverless or Lambda server there in front of the CDN, and that's where you are making, or in different regions, and maybe you will point different players to different because of the region to different places, just to balance also your load. And of course, you are going to be able to understand better also from the player, because remember that you will have the IP of the user agent of the user if it's a player that is making requests through a browser. So you will get some insights about where it is. If you can, this is, again, if we think about CMCD as just an interface, it's just like extra information of whatever you can send. And we can send like all the skis that are available right now and are already implemented in the play, or will be implemented in the players. And again, the logic for how to do content steering, or if you want to use, I don't know, MaxMind to understand the IP, the user, where the user is, and all the stuff, of course, we should build all those services. But the thing is that now we are able to do that, and before we couldn't, at least with CMCD. I don't know if that kind of answers your question.
Okay, thanks. Okay.
Henry, you had a question, right?
Yeah, so if we want to use this to maybe like A/B test playback configurations, like maybe we want to tweak our ABR algorithm or even a CDN configuration. So we could use event mode and then pass a custom key, and then I guess just parse it on our the signaling server.
Yep. Sure. In fact, I love that use case. I will add it to this list.
Yeah. That's what I'm thinking is it would be really fun to A/B test and then have be able to pass in all the CDN information as well.
Make a lot of sense. Any other questions or ideas? I love that one. I will add it to the deck.
Number 10.
So in this use case that you're showing right now,
Mhm.
you're actually suggesting using CMCD instead of the content steering spec?
Maybe. Or
Okay.
add CMCD to the current request you're doing. In fact, I'm thinking like it would be great in players just to say, oh, I'm going to make a content steering request, and you can intercept that request. And if we have a function very easily to just append CMCD, it would be super
Nico,
cool.
you got to be a little careful here now, because you're looking at, there's two aspects of this. One is the data collection, so the data standard and the data collection. And what you're talking about now is moving into an action being made based on business decisions from the data. So I think that's almost taking it one step a little bit further into a mode where you might, it's useful, but it's not the core of what you should be thinking about for CMCD v2. It's an action that you can take based on CMCD data, not necessarily part of the CMCD responsibility.
Exactly.
Yes.
And that's the point. That's what I said. Look, that you can, it's not meant to, but you can use it as interface. And that's also something that could be something very useful to implement new use cases on top of this. But again,
I'm just trying to be
CMCD
careful.
Yeah. And I will put again the warning. Where was the warning? Warning. But yeah.
Okay.
It was over there.
Yeah. Yeah, just because you may say something that you might be like, oh, this is really cool, and then people like Casey will be like, wait, are you stepping into somebody else's
Yeah, and do you
responsibility
need to
matrix?
replace it, or do you need to use
Yeah.
CMCD data to actually
Exactly
enable it? I think that's actually the real interpretability between the two standards. But I think Rob wants to say something.
Hey, I was wondering if there's some place that documents sort of what each CDN offers in terms of CMCD reporting. Like if I'm using Akamai Fastly, like what can I turn on to get CMCD, even if it's just version 1 for now, reports, and like kind of what that costs. And yeah, I don't want to turn this into like a marketing thing, but what's great about the talk is like, look, all the players have it, but then, does everybody have to build their own reporting stack from their CDN logs, or is that kind of already done for us with every CDN under the sun?
My experience with that, Rob, is that the CDNs will collect the data, but what they do with it varies. So you may have to write your own dashboards, or there may be a dashboard for you.
Akamai should have one. I can't speak for the others.
I know CloudFront, you have to make your own, for example. Have like an example article that, you follow the instructions and you get one.
I mean, because from that perspective, the data is flowing in through the HTTP requests, and the CDNs, all they're doing is capturing it, potentially aggregating and modifying by adding their own information. Like, hey, by the way, which nodes is this touching along our path? But at the end of the day, once it gets out or into their own system, somebody has to pull all that data together and make some common sense out of it and actually make it actionable. So I think most CDNs, as long as they're not manipulating or destroying the data, you might be able to get it from the other side through your own logs and do things on your own without having to have the CDNs do anything. And they don't have to be part of the entire equation at all. But I think it behooves them to be able to read it and then present their own dashboard, because they are able to access the data a lot faster than you can, and a lot faster than you trying to retrieve your own logs from them.
And they can charge you more to do it.
Which is where I think where V2 becomes so
Or
good.
you can build your own collector.
Yes.
Data Zoom has a bunch of components, I think, as well already for CMCD interpretation and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is I don't think CDNs really offer that. There is value for the CDNs and what they can do aside from just the logging of data. One of the original intentions of CMCD was to help with CDN performance in a unified fashion, so that CDNs will know, like, hey, maybe I have a better opportunity to pre-position or to handle cache. Like, there's the ability for next object requests, so they can know, hey, okay, the user hasn't requested this, but it's gonna come in. If I can get that there faster, then we can have better performance, especially if the player is suffering, which I can also tell.
And it should also help them with like more information about what's behind a proxy server. So right now they might have one IP address, but now they know there's actually 100 sessions behind that one IP address, because now we can individually count the sessions instead of just seeing requests coming through for the same fragments again and again. The other thing about this is a good thing to talk through, and why V2 looks better, is because with V1 and going through the CDNs, it's an all or nothing approach to all of your content. It's either going to be there for everything or not. And so your economics are in that same scenario. Whereas if you can create your own event session, then you can now configure the scale of your, or the frequency of your CMCD data based on the prioritization of your videos. Now you can adjust your economics to say more information for this event, which I care about, less information for that event, or no information for that event that I don't care about. And you're not dealing with an economics of all or none scenario.
Great, guys. We need to close this up because we are running out of time. And I think this is a topic that we should continue talking about, because it's coming and it's super cool. And probably we'll make more sessions regarding, server guided insertion, CMCD, and get updates from the latest stuff that in both technologies, everything that is coming that is super cool. So thank you everyone for joining today. Big crowd, it's super fun. And I hope that, see you again in the next one. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.